We've taken a look at a bunch of really bad video game consoles here on Rerez, and most of these systems are clone consoles that are just ripped off from some other manufacturer without them knowing and reproduced and mutilated in horrific ways. Now, the console I'm going to show you today came from a manufacturer that I wasn't even aware made video game systems, but apparently at some point during the Nintendo 64 era, they made this. This is the Shopping Channel plug-and-play video game system, and is by far one of the worst consoles I've ever looked at. This system was most likely not actually made by the folks at the Shopping Channel, but they've imported it and branded it with their own sticker and stuff. Now, I really don't know why they did this, but I have to assume that when they saw the release of the Nintendo 64, the Shopping Channel wanted in, and they wanted something that would appeal to a whole bunch of parents out there that had kids that wanted Nintendo 64s. But instead of giving them something like an actual Nintendo 64, or God forbid, an actual PlayStation system that had 3D graphics, they went with the cheapest option possible, a kind of N64 looking controller with 15 terrible NES games built into it. Now, before we take a look at those 15 games, and believe me, you're gonna want to stick around for that, let's take a closer look at this controller. Now, right off the top, you're gonna notice that it's got an analog joystick. And of course, because this system is an NES on a chip, it would never make use of analog inputs, which this definitely isn't. What it is one of these D-pad faceplate things underneath a bit of plastic with a little stick sticking out. It's horrible. It really isn't that responsive at all, and if you're gonna have to use this thing, you're gonna wanna use this D-pad shield thing here, which, by the way, also doesn't work that well because it's just not tuned properly. So let's say you forgive these folks for making one of the worst analog joysticks I've ever used and one of the squishiest D-pads ever presented in any console I've ever played. But what I can't forgive them for is this. All this console is an NES on a chip, so why it has 6 face buttons to the right is the most confusing thing I've ever seen. All the games built into this system only utilize A and B, but what they've done is they've duplicated each button twice for turbo functionality with C, X, Y, and Z. I don't know why anyone would need that many buttons that do the exact same thing, but here it is for some bizarre reason. So, let's talk about the games. As soon as you turn on the system, you're greeted to the 15-in-1 title screen that also happens to have 2 hastily drawn dogs standing on water. And from this menu is where you select one of the 15 games to play. But let's start off with the very first one, World Cup 2000. Now, from the title screen, you're probably assuming that this is from a company called New Game Star, and they made this game in the year 2000. But see, that's not quite accurate, because this game is actually soccer from Nintendo, a game released in 1985 on the NES. Now, of course, because of how bad this console's controller is, this game is an absolute nightmare to control, but the gameplay is essentially the same as you'd find on the NES. But it's the visuals that are different. At the top of the NES original, you see the score and the time left on a match, which is just normal, right? But on this one, there's skulls at the top. Another thing that's weird is that all of the character models in this game have horns for some reason, which isn't in the original, and it makes them all look like little demons. On the original NES version of this game, you see these flags on the sides of the soccer field, but in this version, you're seeing dead bodies. I don't exactly know what all of this means or why these changes were implemented, but I'm pretty sure what they're trying to insinuate here is that this is a soccer game being played in hell. And unlike the original version of soccer, sometimes this one will do weird stuff like this. City A2000, another game from New Game Star. Unfortunately though, this is another ripoff. It's actually Battle City from Namco. In the original release of this game, you drive a tank while shooting at a bunch of enemies and protect this iron emblem you have that's hidden behind a wall. However, in this bastardized version of the game, you're a naked man shaking his dick at oncoming enemies. I've got no idea why his dick's out, but there you go. It's there and everyone can see it, and I don't think there's any way to really hide what he's doing. You can shoot things out of your dick, and that's a thing you can do. You know, I thought the Demon Soccer game was gonna be about as weird as it got, but nope. Here we are, playing this. For our next ripped off game, we're taking a look at Winbolton Champ 2000. Now I believe they meant Wimbledon, which is a real tennis championship, but I guess they just didn't know how to spell that word. So here we go. This is just tennis from the NES. That's all this game is, but they've just decided to screw up the visuals a bit. All the character models are now wearing skirts and have pigtails for some reason, but they've gone even further and changed the chair umpire's model. In the original Nintendo release of this game, he looked like Mario, but in this version they removed his hat and also changed the chair to look more like a milking machine of some sort. Or some kind of weird satellite. I really don't know what he's sitting on, but it certainly isn't a chair. Our next game is called WF Law, which is actually a ripoff of Tag Team Match Muscle. However, let's take a closer look at that logo. Now, call me crazy, but that definitely looks like somebody bent over pulling their butt cheeks apart, which is a very bizarre kind of logo, but I think it was done for one single purpose, and that purpose was to warn people or scare them away from having to play this game. Now look, I'm not a big fan of this game originally because there are far better wrestling games out there, but this version of the game has been made even worse by using one of the most disgusting color palettes I could have ever envisioned. It's all green and toxic looking. You just can't look at it for too long because it actually hurts your eyes. And because of the ridiculous color choices they made on this hack, it almost looks like these characters are farting on each other instead of wrestling. It's really weird. There were a bunch of way better wrestling games on the NES and on the Famicom, and they decided to take one that was just bad to begin with. I guess it would have been harder to steal a better game, maybe? Next up on the chopping block is On the Road, which is a ripoff of 1985's Road Fighter from Konami. Now this is a very strange game because what they've done here is they've modified almost all the sprites to look just a little bit different, but they've also done one additional thing which just confuses me. Now originally they had fuel to the right here, but in this version of the game they've added food. Because obviously changing fuel to food would trick everyone into thinking that they're not actually playing the original game. Now I can play the original Road Fighter pretty well, but this version of the game seems to be a little bit off. Even when taking into consideration how bad the controls are on this console to begin with, the controls seem to be a little bit less responsive than you'd be expecting. And additionally, because they've modified virtually all of the on-screen sprites in this game, the hitboxes are off, which makes it almost a damn impossibility to play properly. Number 6 on the 15 games is a game called Boat Race, which initially looked like something I had never seen before. Now see, when I first played this game, I thought it was something original, because I'd never really seen a boat racing game in this perspective on the NES. But here's my problem. As soon as I engaged the acceleration on this boat here, I heard something. That, right there. Did you hear that? That's tires squeaking. So immediately I thought, well, you know what? This is just a palette swap of some game that actually had cars. And of course it is. This is the exact same game as this. That's all it is. They just did a pretty neat palette swap, but at the end of the day, it's just a palette swap one-to-one with this game. They didn't even bother to change the music or sound effects. And which is weird, because you've got tires squeaking in the water. Now, this game is kind of funny. It's called Top Gun Mission, but it actually isn't Top Gun. You see, Top Gun doesn't look like this. What this game is Sky Destroyer. But what's hilarious about this game is they switched out the colors. Now see, while you're playing it here, it looks like you're flying over some grasslands or something, but see, all of that in the original game is actually water. Heck, even when you crash into this ground, you still splash like it was water. Just such laziness. The next game on the set is called Autumn Hunt, which clearly is, yep, that's just Duck Hunt. They've really messed with the graphics here, and it is really awkward looking. I mean, those ducks don't even look like they have heads, and the dog is now a Dalmatian for some reason. This is just a very strange looking version of this very iconic game, but it gets even worse when you stop and think about this game being included on this set. So you've got a knockoff version of Duck Hunt on this system, but why is that a problem? Well, look at the console. This is it. This is all I got. This game doesn't work when you're playing with this controller. Even all the extra 6 buttons don't do anything. But here's the really big problem. Let's say you do have an NES zapper that you want to hook up to this so that you can play it on a good old-fashioned CRT monitor. Well, that's not going to happen, because the input underneath is the same input from an Atari or a Sega Genesis. I've got no idea why they use that controller input method. I have to assume that at some point when you bought this thing originally from the shopping network, they would actually give you a bundled zapper, but as far as I'm aware, it doesn't exist and I couldn't find one, and when I bought this was all I got with it. So that's it. Useless game.
So after that waste of a game, we now have UFO Shooting, which is just clay shooting, which was included with the original release of Duck Hunt.
See, that's stupid. All they did was they took a game that was already included with Duck Hunt and broke it off into 2 separate games. Basically, they just kind of faked their way through 15 games. But why the hell would you do that? And what makes it worse, this is another game you can't play because you don't have a zapper input for this.
Now, as we've seen, all the games on the system so far have been copies of NES or Famicom games that already existed in the past and were just hacked and modified in slight ways to be on the system.
Now, something interesting I noticed about this is that on the back, it's got a little faceplate over an area where it looks like you could put cartridges. If not NES cartridges, maybe Famicom carts. So I decided to open the thing up and take a look at the back. And you can see that there was some evidence of some kind of input connector method for the bottom here. So I believe there might be variations of the system somewhere out there where you can actually put cartridges on here. And when you open it up and take a look, all they're doing is just bypassing all that stuff off into a single chip so that you can just play that one ROM with these 15 games that are bundled into the system. That's all this is, a knockoff clone system that can't even play cartridges. That just makes it even worse.
So the next game on the list is City B2000, which is just City A2000, just with a different title screen.
What? There's only 15 games and you duplicated them? Why would you do that? You only had to have 15 knockoff games and you copied one of the games. What is the purpose of that?
But it gets worse, because the very next game, called Mission Impossible, isn't Mission Impossible at all, it's just Top Gun Mission again. Nothing has changed! It's the exact same game they gave you earlier on, but again, for some reason. And the next game, World Rally Champ, is just on the road again. But see, what they did to change this game out is they start you off right at Course 2 instead of Course 1. You can still get to this level by playing the very first version of this game on the game system, but I guess for people that just want to get to level 2 a lot quicker, all they have to do is click on this game. And the next game after this is called Rugged Racer, which, let me guess, yes, absolutely, it's just Course 3 from On the Road. But what makes this even worse is that this is one of the original levels from Road Fighter from Konami, but they've simply butchered it. Look, for some reason, your car starts off in the dirt on the side of the road, and as soon as the game begins, you clip right back onto the street. Every time they introduce a new version of this game, the game seems to be hacked more and more to the point where it's almost unplayable. I mean, they simply can't keep copying this game, right? But wait, we've got another game on this list that might be another one, Highway Star, and yes, it's Course 4 from the exact same game.
What? Why would you do this? That doesn't make any sense. You already copied the game 3 times. Why would you need to copy it again?
As if having 4 versions of the same racing game isn't bad enough, the final title on this 15-game epic is called Grand Prix Champ, and I'm pretty sure you're all assuming it's gonna be that racing game again. Well, you'd be wrong. It's the boat racing game being repeated.
Oh, this is just insane. 15 games and you copied them again and again? Why would you do this? There had to have been 15 games you could have ripped off from any source, but you guys were so lazy that you didn't even copy other games, you just copied your own stupid games. And look, some of these games have weird variations and differences between them, but they're just bad hacks, bad modifications that are just terrible with what they are. This is god-awful.
Trying to find anything positive in this console is pretty much an impossibility. I mean, I was expecting it to be bad, but not this bad.
So there you have it, mostly 15 games that are just awful, being played on the plug-and-play system from the shopping channel. But this is what confuses me. Those 15 games, even the duplicates, are from other manufacturers who still own the code for these games. And Duck Hunt being a really big Nintendo property, why the heck did they not get sued or served a cease and desist for selling these systems? Maybe they did. And maybe that's why these things don't exist anymore, but I like to hope that maybe the shopping channel wised up and figured, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't screw people over by selling them these things. Because if I woke up one morning and my parents gave me this as a gift, I probably would have hurled it right back at their faces.